Welcome, everyone, to Buddha's Center. So fortunate to be here tonight. All of us are attending this teaching where we can actually find out how to get everything that we've been looking for our entire lives and never been satisfied because we haven't found it. And we know that every single being in the universe is looking for the same thing, and that's happiness and freedom from suffering and the most amount of happiness that's possible. And what's amazing about this evening is that we're talking about the stages of the path to enlightenment that were passed down from Buddha Shakyamuni that show us exactly how to achieve exactly what we want to have. And we're so fortunate. When I say I'm so fortunate to be here tonight talking about these stages, it's that because not everybody in the universe and most beings in the universe don't really know about this information. They, like before I found out about this information, thought that the only way to achieve happiness was to chase after external things and try to find the next thing that would finally satisfy me. And, not being able to find that final thing that was able to satisfy me when I looked under every single rock one could possibly look under. Luckily, when I started to investigate various spiritual traditions and various religions, I was able to come in contact with the Buddha Dharma and come in contact with this truth that Buddha Shakyamuni came to teach 2,600 years ago. And it wasn't a truth that he came up with, it was a truth that he discovered about the nature of reality that we can all discover. And it was a truth that allowed him to be able to get rid of all of the things that we currently have that make us unsatisfied. And if we can get rid of all of the things that make us unsatisfied and only have causes for satisfaction, then we'll be able to really achieve what we want, that ease of mind, that complete stress, all the stress removed from our minds, all of the worries removed from our minds, all of the states of happiness that we wish was a little happier are removed and taken to the most perfect state of happiness based on cause and effect. And what the Buddha discovered was what the cause and effect exactly is that produces a mind that only experiences bliss, is the most reliable mind in the universe, and has the most perfect love, compassion, power, and wisdom that is achievable. And this perfect caring for others that is achievable. And independence upon caring for others, which is what we learn how to do in the Mahayana, in the great vehicle traditions, independence upon caring for others, and independence upon coupling that with a wisdom that starts to understand what we've been getting wrong the whole time that's causing all of our suffering and our dissatisfactory states. We can achieve a state of freedom just like the Buddha achieved by removing what is called the afflictive obstructions that keep one bound to a cycle of suffering, and the obstructions to omniscience that keep one from being able to have the ultimate amount of reliability, the highest amount of happiness, the highest amount of love, the highest amount of compassion, the highest amount of skillful means. So we're on a track, if we listen to these teachings this evening, to achieve the state of Buddhahood. And we're so fortunate that we are not trying to take a track that's going to take an incredibly long time to get to Buddhahood because we're, wasting time in byways and so forth. We have a very, very direct path, as I said, that's passed down from Buddha Shakyamuni all the way down through what are called the Nalanda Pandits, these Indian masters that analyzed and debated and checked the teachings just as Buddha Shakyamuni said to do, and presented us with texts of clarification and presented these incredible scriptures that we're able to rely upon in order to clarify what Buddha Shakyamuni came to teach. Because Buddha Shakyamuni taught to scope of the individual that he was speaking to. And whatever that individual needed to hear in order to help him or her progress to the next stage of spiritual development is exactly what Buddha said to that individual. So if we were to just look at everything that Buddha ever said without any kind of lens, without any kind of comparison, without any kind of analysis by someone who is really, really invested in understanding this material, we could get lost. We could not necessarily know where to begin. We would not necessarily know what the very profound points that the Buddha made in the first turning of the wheel of Dharma, where he taught the Four Noble Truths, and the second turning of the wheel of Dharma, where he taught the perfection of wisdom, the Heart Sutra, the third turning of the wheel of Dharma, where he interpreted his own teachings. So in order for us to understand all of these various turnings of the wheel of Dharma that the Buddha taught, we have to be able to learn exactly what they are. And the Buddha came to show us exactly how to incorporate these teachings and how to then progress through a path. But the Buddha was speaking to so many different types of people that the Nalanda Pandits then came to describe what these various opportunities for an individual were and presentations for various individuals were in order for them to be able to progress. And then what was so kind is Lord Atisha came and talked to the Tibetans. He came to Tibet and in the 900s and came to show how to take all of these teachings passed down from Buddha Shakyamuni that came into the Nalanda tradition that he was a part of, and how to then put them into stages of practice that are very, very, very precise. And what do these stages of practice do? They allow us to achieve complete Buddhahood at the end of the rainbow, if you will, at the other side of the pathways that are shared in common with beings of small and medium capacity and the pathways for beings of great capacity. If we begin from wherever we are spiritually within that particular system of small, medium, and great, and then we engage in the practices that come next and the ones that come next and the ones that come next in order to have the realizations that are built upon the foundations of the earlier realizations, we will eventually be able to mature our minds that have good qualities now, but will have greater and greater and greater qualities by maturing our mind in dependence upon these stages of the path that Atisha was able to show us how to understand the order of our practice by relying upon the Nalanda Pandits who have interpreted the Buddha's teachings and understanding the Buddha's teachings at their essence by looking at it through a lens of incredible investigation that these masters have done for us. And we're able to be spoon-fed this information of how to get our minds to mature to a complete state of Buddhahood because these masters have cut and rubbed the teachings as Buddha has told us all to do. The Buddha said, don't just rely upon me because I've come to the world and said great things or because I look like a wonderful individual. You should rely upon me only after you've taken my teachings, cut and rubbed them, and seen if there's something there to discover that's truth for yourself. And once you do that, then you can say, this is something that I should follow. But blind faith isn't something that should be incorporated into these practices because of the fact that that isn't going to allow you to discover something for yourself if you're only trying to just have some faith in me to be able to try to help you without you doing some work. And the Buddha said that I don't wash away negativities with water. I don't remove your suffering with my hands. I don't transfer realizations to you. All of these things are things that Buddha doesn't do. But what the Buddha does is teach the truth of suchness so that beings are liberated. So the Buddha came 2,600 years ago, to wrap this back around, and came to teach the truth of suchness so that beings could liberate themselves. But everyone, as you know, we know a lot of varieties of beings, is not in the same exact headspace. So each and every person's headspace has to be dealt with individually, and the Buddha knew this. And the Buddha brought an entire pharmacy of medication for all the varieties of things within our minds and the various negativities that need to be dispelled to eventually get to a place where we could understand the truth of suchness as bodhisattvas. So the Buddha came and taught these varieties of things, and all of these varieties of things were passed down through the Nalanda Pandits who analyzed them and wrote all these scriptures, but still quite difficult to understand exactly for someone like me how to practice it. And then Lord Atisha came and clarified it and showed us how to practice it in terms of beings of three capacities, and then beings like the great master Lama Tsongkhapa and Jay Gampopa and so forth elucidated even more about what Lord Atisha came to teach us about. And what was that they all came to teach us about? Exactly what Buddha Shakyamuni came and taught. And that is how to go from wherever you are at spiritually, wherever your mind is at, the worst mind, the best mind, wherever it's at, your mind has the potential to be perfect. Your mind has the potential to have perfect love, compassion, skillful means, power, and wisdom. Your mind has that potential. No matter if you think you're the worst or you think you're the most compassionate. If you're not a Buddha, you haven't realized everything that you need to realize. And the beauty of what the Buddha came to teach was that he didn't leave any of us out. He took someone like me with a very polluted, he talked to people like me with very polluted minds and gave us medicine to take in order to progress upon a path that would eventually lead to perfection. And then he said, well, there's beings who are of higher scope that can understand it in this way, and they don't need necessarily, all of the information in order to work it through their minds. They can have very condensed instructions. But we have to be very honest with ourselves. And if we have the Lam Rim as a mirror, and we have texts like the great treatise on the stage of the path to enlightenment by Lama Tsongkhapa, and we have texts like Words of My Perfect Teacher by Zapatra Rinpoche, and we have texts like The Jeweled Ornament for Liberation by Jegam Popa, we can see where we really are at spiritually. We can see whether or not we are these great spiritual practitioners that we think we are. We just have to look at the texts, and we have to see if our mind works in the ways of small capacity practitioner. Does our mind work in the way of a medium level practitioner? Does our mind work in the way of a great vehicle practitioner? And we use the mirror of the Dharma in order to see whether or not our minds are matured, what they need to do to mature, and the fastest way to mature them. And only to mature them, not because we want to be goody two-shoes, to mature them because we want to achieve perfect happiness and freedom from suffering. And when we think about this very, very deeply, and we think about, okay, we settle it down for a moment and we say, I have this opportunity. I have an opportunity to be free from suffering forever, because I can rely upon these teachings that the Buddha came and gave that show us how to combine method and wisdom and through a process be able to achieve this thing called Buddhahood, where there's complete perfect happiness and freedom from suffering and this reliability. So when we think about, wow, I have this opportunity that I can never have to suffer again because of the Buddha's teachings, and the Buddha achieved something that is this perfect state of happiness and perfect well-being and just a perfect caring mind. How did the Buddha achieve such a thing? And then when we stop and we think about all the people that we love around us, the person that we care about the most and others that we care about so much in our lives, think about them for a moment. And think about if they all know about this truth that Buddha Shakyamuni came to teach. Do they know that it's the self-grasping ignorance that gives rise to inappropriate attention, that gives rise to the coarse afflictions, that gives rise to contaminated karmas, that gives rise to the mess called samsara, the cycle of rebirth over and over again into suffering states? Do they know about this? Have they heard about this? Have they all heard about this? Has everybody you love heard about this? So you start to think about that. You start to think about sharing this with those that you love, because why wouldn't you? It wouldn't cost you anything to just say, hey, there's this information. You should really check it out. There's this information that can allow you to never suffer again and have perfect happiness and have this state called Buddhahood, where you have perfect love, compassion, skillful means, power, and wisdom. There's this place where you can have perfect ease and perfect peace. We think about the person that we care about the most in this world who maybe doesn't even know about this, or others that we care about so much, they don't know about this. We think about sharing this with them. Like I said, it doesn't cost us anything to share it with them. And that feeling that you have of wanting someone you care about so much to not have to have the various types of suffering that we study so much when we look at the First Noble Truth. We start from that springboard of that feeling of this urgency. If they would listen, if you could just think of all those people that you love, if for the moment their mind was just open and they said, tell me what it is, tell me what this medicine is, what is the truth, what did the Buddha come to speak about, that they had an open mind for just a moment. Imagine how much you would want to share this with them. And then when we think about our meditations that we do hopefully on a daily basis, where we engage in the practice of the meditation on equanimity that then leads us into the 7-point cause and effect for realizing the mind that aspires to enlightenment. We engage in the practice of equalizing and exchanging self with others. When we do those first practices where we look at this equanimity in terms of the pre-step for equalizing and exchanging self with others, we start to investigate this beginningless state of existence that we've had. We've been reborn again and again and again. And all of these sentient beings have had different relationships with us. Every being that we come in contact with has cared about us in a previous life. Since we've had beginningless lives, this moment's consciousness was caused by a previous moment's consciousness. It was caused by a previous moment's consciousness, caused by a previous moment's consciousness. And we see that there is nothing from a dissimilar class that has ever caused it. We see that it exists in temporal moments. This consciousness, this state of knowing, this illuminated state of knowing that reflects so clearly. We see that it's existing just in moments of time. There's no physical matter in this consciousness. It's going to move forward. And the moment before, when I just said, and the moment before, that doesn't exist anymore. It's extinguished because it was just as soon as a cause gives rise to the result, the cause goes away and the result comes up. And this is how cause and effect works. And this is how temporal moments work. So every moment, as soon as the next moment happens, that moment's extinguished as soon as the next moment arises. And this is how we see our minds just going forward. And when we start to trace it back, we see that this moment didn't exist a moment ago. And that moment didn't exist the moment before. And that moment didn't exist the moment before. And we start to trace it back and we just see that this mental consciousness is a continuum that exists in time, that isn't destroyable, and has always been, has always known, has always been clear in knowing. Clear in the sense of reflecting clearly, clear in the sense of lit up and illuminating. It's always been that. This moment of it right now that I'm talking to you is because of whatever the moments that led up to before. And those moments are gone, but those moments existed. So we posit those moments as existing as a memory because we remember it. But because of our limitations, we don't remember even coming out of a womb. I don't remember a lot of my younger days even, but we don't remember being in a womb, but some beings do. We don't remember our intermediate state, but some beings do. We don't remember our previous life, but some beings do. But we can't posit that they don't exist. There's no way. And it's more logical to posit that they do. And this is where we begin with this idea that these things that we have to come with concordant causes that make them arise. And those concordant causes diminish as soon as the arisal of the effect is there, which then becomes something that will diminish in terms of temporal moments and in terms of form will diminish because it arose. And these are things that we have to think about in order to establish the idea that we have this thing that is going so far back that we're talking about beginningless. And we're just stuck on our first memory of this life that's so limited. So when we think about this previous life, We see the varieties of beings that are connected to us even in this life that we come in contact with, that we've had all of kind of like intense relationships with, intense interactions with, be they loving or unloving. We've had these intense interactions with lots and lots of people, and we can see how even in this life, someone we think is the most important person in the world becomes the least important person in the world. And someone we thought was so awful becomes someone we really like. I really like that person. We can see just in this life, this switching that we do. And we just decided that someone we care about so much, we just wish that they could have this truth. But who is that? Who is that person? And when we start to trace it back and we look at equanimity and we start to see that, oh, this person that I love even in this life could change. And the person that I love now in my previous life, I had a totally different relationship with. They could have been my enemy. They could have eaten me when I was a fish and they were a fisherman. And I nourished them. So now, we have this weird karmic relationship where I nourished them and now they're taking care of me, or, start to think in these broader terms. And you can see that every being that you come in contact with has had the same kind of relationship with you as the person that you say you care about more than anything else in this world, or a group of people that you care about so much. Because it's not just like this intense person. There's this group. This is our people, right? We care about so much that can just change and shift. What if it's exactly accurate that we're just so blind and ignorant that every being in the universe has taken care of us when we were vulnerable and has felt like our people? It stops making sense to only care so much about the person that you brought 5 minutes ago, to only feel that intimacy with them. So you use logic and reasoning to start to loosen your bias. You don't use blind faith. The Buddha doesn't like that. The Buddha said, don't do that. You use logic and reasoning to prove to yourself that it doesn't make sense to be biased, and that you should, if you want the person you care about and the people you care about to have medicine that they need, because the Buddha came to cure our ailments of suffering, cure our dissatisfaction. So everyone is equally important if from that perspective to you. If everyone's as close to you as the person that you said 7 minutes ago, in your mind, you couldn't bear to think they didn't have this chance. They didn't know. You don't like the fact that they don't know. Self-grasping ignorance causes an inappropriate attention and a haziness that distorts everything even more than. And then you have these gross afflictions of attachment that come up and aversion that come up that cause you to then act bad or good. But good with self-grasping ignorance just gets you more samsara, gets you more cycle of suffering. And those people that you love so much that don't know anything about it and just have to keep suffering over and over again, and you have that key and you just couldn't imagine they don't. You start to really analyze these different perspectives, and you can see how then a mind could mature to a point that you could open the door to the Mahayana, because you've generated bodhicitta. You've generated an idea that may I become enlightened for the sake of all sentient beings. It's these little baby steps where you see how you feel about helping someone, and you start to see if you can feel that need to help everyone by broadening your perspective all the way out to those people that you don't currently like, because you're just distorting your relationship with them. Because if the person that you love so much right now went insane because they ate something that made them go insane, or had some cause and condition that made them go insane, you would love them. You would want to take care of them. You would want the best for them no matter what. And just because somebody's under the control of afflictions that you care about so much, you've just forgotten. This changes you. This changes the perspective. So I don't mean to make these introductions so long, but the whole point of this for me is to be able to impart on you some of the practices that you can connect in your daily life to what you find in the great treatise in the stage of the path to enlightenment that we're looking at through the poem of the foundation of all good qualities, the source of all my good by Lama Tsongkhapa. So you can see how to integrate these things into your life and see how they really are springboards for big realizations. We shouldn't say, oh, this feels so fake. Okay, now he's going to do the part where we invite all of the beings, and he's going to say the hell and hungry ghost, and it just feels so fake. But the more you can bring this exercise into your life, where you start to think about, okay, the Four Noble Truths, the truth of suffering. I know about all of these different types of suffering that I have to engage in, and I know why I have to engage in them because I've looked at the origin of suffering. And I know that it can all end because if I end a cause for something, then it can't arise. And there's a way for me to get out because there's a path. I start from this place where I recognize that I can get out. I start from this place where I see that there is this knowledge, there is this way out for everyone. And then from that place, I then start to think about others and the opportunities that they're missing, and how when it's unbearable for me to think of anyone's suffering, it should be any one person's suffering. It should be unbearable for me using logic and reasoning to have to hear that anyone is suffering. And that's really powerful because we're part of a collective entity that is called sentient beings, and we all collectively only want happiness and want to be free from suffering. And everyone is cared for us and so interconnected, and we're so connected to all of them. So when we look at our needs, I need for Lorinda to feel well, for me to really feel well. And if we really think about it, you think about your partner, your loved ones, so your kids. When they don't feel well, it disturbs my mind. So what a Buddha has figured out and what Bodhisattvas figure out is how to care and want them to be free from suffering and love them without having the disturbance of the mind that's mixed with the attachment. So these exercises that we're doing, no matter how contrived or fake they may seem to your mind, nothing becomes more difficult through practice. We have to believe that a small child in one of those, baby cars where they have a little fake steering wheel, right? They have a little fake steering wheel. They're pretending to drive a car. We're pretending to drive a car. Don't be so naive to think that that doesn't help them know how to use a steering wheel when they're 16 or 17 or 18, whenever you get your license now. Don't think that the baby pretending they're in a little thing using a steering wheel and then learning how to maneuver a tricycle, they're not driving a car, but they're doing the things that are going to get them to be able to, in baby steps, to actually do the real thing. we're doing these exercises that are laying tracks into our mind that are getting us to be able to, even if it's in a contrived way, lay tracks that will eventually generate these minds of love, compassion, and bodhicitta that aren't contrived, that are just our natural way of thinking. A bodhisattva has a main mind that wants to, day and night, become a Buddha for everyone's sake. So the Buddha has this main mind all of the time that's operating. And this main mind that's operating all of the time is something that didn't just come about from nowhere. Bodhicitta, the aspirational bodhicitta, when we look at Panchen Sonandrapa's general meaning of perfection, we see that there's, all of these things that have to come about in order for this mind to be generated. And what we're doing tonight, when we think about this person that we care about and these people that we care about that don't necessarily have access to this truth, that haven't heard that self-grasping ignorance gives a rise to inappropriate attention and gives a rise to coarse afflictions and gives a rise to contaminated karmas that give a rise to samsara. We have beings around that haven't heard about this. And when we think about those that we care about and wish they'd heard about it and expand this idea through recognizing through equanimity that the bias doesn't logically make any sense, then we're starting to lay the tracks. We have a physical basis that we can get bodhicitta with right now, because we're in among the 6 realms of cyclic existence. And the mental basis is the thing that we're missing. We don't have this understanding of the Buddha's excellent qualities and these kind of willingnesses that we need and the understandings that we need within our minds in a complete way to generate an aspirational bodhicitta. We haven't engaged in the practices in a full way of equalizing and exchanging self with others, passed down from Buddha Shakyamuni to Manjushri and Nagarjuna, and then down through Shantideva. We haven't engaged in the practices of the 7-point cause and effect passed down from Buddha Shakyamuni to Lord Maitreya and Asanga, like the 7-point cause and effect for realizing the mind that aspires to enlightenment. We haven't engaged in this. And as we just talked about, the equanimity practice we haven't engaged in. So we have all of these biases. We have all of this bias that doesn't allow us to equally want to benefit everyone. And this is where we have to start as a foundation, like, hey, I have an open mind. I would be equally willing to benefit all of you, no matter who you are. We have to be able to start from that place. And this contrived thing that we do where we, or not contrived, maybe you're all bodhisattvas and maybe you're already doing this in a real way, or maybe you're Buddhas and doing this in a real way. But to be able to get to the point where we are bodhisattvas, we have to engage in practices where we lay imprints in our minds and we plant seeds in our minds, because we know that all results depend upon causes and results depend upon concordant causes if we want to see their ripening. And if we want to see the ripening of this beautiful mind of bodhicitta, that's the only entrance into the Mahayana, that leads us through, begins the Mahayana path of accumulation and leads us through the path of accumulation, preparation, seeing, meditation, and eventually to no more learning. If we want to be able to go through that, all of those pathways that lead to the unsurpassable state of Buddhahood, that has to start with the causal steps to get there. And where we eventually get to is the place that we're pretending now that we're at. We eventually get to through these practices that lead to a place where we want to day and night become a Buddha for the sake of all sentient beings, that then lead through the 4 paths that get to the path of new more learning. And eventually, because of these bodhisattva paths that we've practiced, we will be able to spontaneously, because of the compassion that we have, we won't have a choice, we will spontaneously emanate various bodies of the Sambhogakaya and the Nirmanakaya, the Sambhogakaya and the Nirmanakaya, or the enjoyment bodies and the emanation bodies, to help sentient beings, to be able to speak to them in their own individual languages, and to be able to, in one utterance of an expression, if all sentient beings asked the Buddha a question simultaneously, he'd be able to answer, or she would be able to answer their questions with one utterance of a sentence because of the all-knowing mind. And we'll be able to do that eventually. We'll be able to speak to each being in their own individual capacity when we go through the stages that get us there. And tonight we're going to lay tracks in our mind that set up bases, that set up the ground for the growth of this beautiful mind, Bodhicitta, that's the only entrance to the Mahayana, that allows us to then engage in a pathway that gets us to omniscience, where we've gotten rid of the afflictive obstructions and the obstructions to omniscience and dependence upon a path, and we'll be able to then not only speak in the language of all beings and have 60 melodious tones, but we'll have this ability to send these bodies to beings in their various capacities. We'll be able to send bodies to Ogmin, to all the Arya Bodhisattvas, and teach them. We'll be able to send bodies to the various other realms within cyclic existence where the Arya beings aren't being taught by the Buddha, in the enjoyment body, and we'll be able to send these bodies and be able to help beings in their whatever their capacities are. So without further ado, let's imagine that we're doing what Buddhas can do. And let's imagine that we invite every single sentient being here to be able to be our guest, to be able to hear the Dharma, to be able to hear the teachings for beings of three capacities. And we imagine that when they get here, they're able to hear exactly what it is within the framework of those teachings, wherever they are in the spiritual path. We're imagining we're bringing them here to hear exactly what it is they need to hear. And that's the only thing that the Buddha would ever say to them. So we imagine that we're bringing them to hear exactly what it is that they need to hear. And we're imagining that we're bringing them here because we know that they want the same thing that we want, to be free from suffering and to have happiness, because we know that they're sentient beings. And last week we said, if that's a sentient being, they necessarily want happiness. If that's a sentient being, they necessarily want to be free from suffering. If that's a sentient being, they're necessarily not satisfied with their status, even if they're a bodhisattva on the high grounds, because they're not satisfied with the obstructions to omniscience. So let's imagine we bring all of those sentient beings here that we're talking about, and we know that the line of demarcation, the two kinds of beings in the universe, if we want to just say two, there are those Buddhas and there are sentient beings. When we look at mind possessors, when we look at people who have a consciousness, should you say, we know there's Buddhas and they have no obstructions to omniscience and no afflictive obstructions. And then there's sentient beings. And those sentient beings at least have obstructions to omniscience. So let's imagine we bring everyone here to hear exactly what they need to progress on their own next path, even if it's like to hop from the 10th ground, into the path, into no more learning when we're looking at it. So imagine that we bring all sentient beings here, and I'll recite this from the King of Prayers. Khenso Geshe Wandak Rinpoche, we know, recited this before every teaching, and I'll do the same. And while I'm reciting this, please imagine that you bring all beings in the universe here, all hell beings, 8 hot hells, 8 cold hells, the surrounding hells, all the hungry ghosts. Imagine you bringing all of the animals, and we can actually perceive the animal realm, and we know how much suffering they have to go through. The animals in the sea, the animals in the land, the animals in the sky. Think about all these varieties of sentient beings and how much they want happiness, how much they want to be free from suffering, just like you. Think about the dissatisfaction that you have. Think about the worst states of suffering than you could ever imagine. You know there's worse suffering than you've had, even that you can see with your own eyes. Think that there's suffering that's worse than you've ever seen with your own eyes or been able to even imagine. Just think about these beings that have to experience these horrendous amounts of suffering. And they've all cared for you in previous lives and loved you just like the person that would take care of you in your most vulnerable state right now. And they're having to experience those sufferings that you read about and see. Think about this as you invite them. Make this a real experience. Take it from the experience of knowing your own suffering through the Four Noble Truths and the identification of the 8, 6, and 3 types of suffering that you have to experience. and think about being propelled into these various realms and the sufferings that they're experiencing. And think about their relationship that you've had with them previously, and think about how you feel about the person you love right now. And see if you can get closer to a feeling like that for strangers and closer to a feeling like that for people you find distasteful eventually. This is really powerful, powerful medicine. And if you take it, it will change your mind. Imagine you bring all human beings here again, friends, strangers, enemies. And we don't have to say, like, I don't have enemies. Like, we're not a superhero. Like, I don't have like an arch rival. But you have people that you find very difficult, and you have people on the news that you dislike greatly. And you say, well, I dislike them because I want all beings to have happiness, and I want all beings to be free from suffering, and they're making people suffer and not have happiness. But they're suffering and they don't have happiness. And they took care of you and loved you so much at some point. You've just totally forgotten. And they're maybe just acting crazy. Just if Buddha's right, they're acting crazy because they're under the control of afflictions. The affliction's the bad thing. That's the enemy. The person's the victim who's acting like that. The person's mind is feeling disturbed. We can't say, oh, that angry person right there who's just, they're so full of ego, they're so happy. We've studied Buddhism. We know they're not. We know that they're terrified internally, scared all the time, worried, as Janjarubi Dorje says in the beginning of the beautiful ornament of Mount Meru, worried, just worried all the time because of afflictions, and like a puppet of the afflictions, moving around the body and saying stuff because intention is just overridden, overrun by just dirty, self-cherishing attitude. And we start to think about this, and we start to think about the relationships. It's not just one idea or one reason. We were in class today and we were looking at all the different reasons to establish emptiness and wholes and parts and labels and causes and conditions, and looking at all the 3 levels of dependent origination. And it's like, you have to have all of these multi facets, all these different angles to look at to start to like make sense out of it. If you look at the number of signs and reasonings, everybody says, oh, Shantideva's Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, such a mellow text. No, there's so many. If you get a Geshe to explain that text to you and go over it with all the signs and reasons to establish, that, self-cherishing attitude is not good, cherishing others is good. If you start to look at the hundreds of reasons that are presented in there, it's just really amazing. And it's not just one reason that's going to change your mind and make you say, when you see somebody who is really normally annoying, the minute that you see them making noise and moving arms, we can't read their mind. We're seeing them making noise and moving arms, and the noise they're making isn't a noise we particularly like. We say, oh my gosh, that person was kind to me. It was when I was so vulnerable. They were my brother, my sister, my mother, my father, my lover, my dog. I mean, I love my dogs, right? I wouldn't want anything to ever happen. Like, even if one got stung yesterday and there was a major crisis that we had going on in our minds. So yeah. So this is what we're trying to do. We're basically trying to use all of these multifaceted kind of reasonings to make our minds more satisfied and less disturbed, not to try to do anything else, just to try to get ourselves to a place where we're actually reliable. That's what the Buddha is. The only reliable guide, the only completely reliable guide is someone who's omniscient. And not only omniscient, but has this perfect caring for others. Because you could know everything, but if you don't care about anybody, it doesn't really help anybody. But imagine if you know everything and you care about everything, everyone, then you'll know how to care for everyone. Exactly. So you start to look at the goal. Is this, okay, could this be possible? Could I be a being that could do these sorts of things that the Buddha can do? Could I be a being who has this kind of excellent qualities of body, speech, and mind and enlightened activities? You have to investigate it. And you have to see part of the proof is in the discovery of your own practice. So you put this idea of this perfect being out there that's like, yeah, that's great. How does a Buddha think? What's it look like in the Buddha's world? This perfect being out there. And you start to see that what the Buddha taught makes sense because you start to discover little bits and pieces of it for yourself. And when you see that your mind is getting better, that starts to prove to you the proliferating Buddha nature, that you have these pieces of your mind that can proliferate and get better. And the kind of the natural Buddha nature is the emptiness of the proliferating Buddha nature, which makes it be able to mature. Because if emptiness is possible, everything's possible. But if emptiness isn't possible, nothing's possible, as Nagarjuna would say. So we have this mind that can mature because it's not stuck with afflictive obstructions and obstructions to omniscience. It's not stuck with a gross and subtle self-cherishing attitude. Prove it to yourself that it's not stuck. Become a better being. Become a being with a better mind. And that'll prove to you your mind can get better. And when you do this year after year after year, and you start to get into the study of emptiness, and you start to meditate, and you start to calm your mind down, and you start to pull your mind inward and start to like try to be less focused on outward, you'll see that the Buddha was not lying. The Buddha had discovered something and came to tell us about it. And if somebody who's like a crook who's kind of selling snake oil wouldn't tell you, don't believe me, until you cut and rub and check it and logically look at the details and make sure that this is discoverable. And then you take it further and further and further. And you see that if this mind is just in the clear and knowing, its nature's unsullied, the defilements are just adventitious. You can see they're adventitious because you start to watch them leave. And if the mind was stuck with them, they couldn't leave. And you can start to see stability in their leaving. And I don't mean that I've had any kind of high realizations, but I'm not as big of a jerk as I was before. And there would have been no way to evolve into less jerkness, as Professor Jeffrey Hopkins would say. There would be no way for a mind like mine. If you knew me when I was much, much younger, there would be no way for the mind like that angry, hardcore band, druggy guy, that guy's mind to be like this mind. Not one that has renunciation, not one that has shamatha, not one that has bodhicitta, but one that is drastically different than the one before. And only drastically different than the one before because of the stages of the path. And because I cut and rub the teachings, because I had qualified teachers like Khenso Geshe Wandak Rinpoche and Geshe Lobsang Gompo Rinpoche and Demo Locha Rinpoche and Khenso Lobsang Gyatso Rinpoche and now Geshe Dorje Damdu Rinpoche and Umzala Geshe Aga Rinpoche and Professor Jeffrey Hopkins for the short period of time that Lori and I were able to be so blessed to study with him. It's only because I've been told to don't be satisfied with partial instructions that I've been able to say, yeah, this stuff works, because I wasn't satisfied with partial instructions and I've tried to apply this, failed a lot, but made a little headway on a mind that needed some headway making. So when you do these practices, as I said, you're trying to create the causes and conditions within your mind that could arise into the state of Buddhahood. You know, all phenomena arise from causes. The causes are taught by the Tathagata. The cessation of causes as well are taught by the great seer. So we have to create those things, those phenomena in our mind that would give rise to phenomena of a perfect mind. And a perfect mind only is gotten to by the most kind of perfect thoughts that we could have as sentient beings. And those are to cherish others more than ourselves, to just love everyone, to want them to have happiness and the causes of happiness, just like we do, to want them to be free from suffering and the causes of suffering, just like we want that, to want them to be satisfied, just like we want to be satisfied, want them to have 100% happiness, not 90% happiness, want them to reach their full potential, not a partial potential, not an abiding nirvana where they haven't satisfied even their own needs, let alone all sentient beings' needs. Our minds can become bigger and bigger and bigger through practice. But if we don't practice, or if we just try to become intellectually stimulated all of the time, and we don't see how we apply the stages of the tenet systems and so forth to the staircase of our understanding of the emptiness of our own mind, and we don't actually try to engage in the practices that make us get a mind where we want to become a Buddha for the sake of all sentient beings, it's not going to touch us in a way that's going to mean and matter so much. So imagine you're bringing all human beings here with that speech being said, and friends, neutrals, and then those difficult people. And then we imagine the demigods and the gods, and in the gods realm, the desire realm gods and the four formless realm levels of God, four form realm levels of gods, four formless realm levels of gods. Just imagine we're inviting all of these beings here in order to hear these teachings. In the language of gods, nagas, and yakshas, in the language of demons and of humans too, and however many kinds of speech there may be, I shall proclaim the Dharma in the language of all. Now, all sentient beings are here. You've invited them here to share this gift of the Dharma with them, to be able to hear the teachings for beings of three capacities, which encompass everything from the very beginning of where you become a spiritual practitioner, a Buddhist religious practitioner, to the point where you are in the last stage you need to be to get to that place of Buddhahood. And then the explanation of what Buddhahood is found within there too. We're so fortunate that we have these teachings and that everyone's here to be able to hear them. So we bring all of these beings here, and now we're going to invoke the merit field. So that's the bodhicitta field that we talked about. And it enhances, they'll become more and more strong. Whenever you do virtuous practice, imagine that you're sharing it with beings, that you're bringing beings with you. If you're doing shamatha practice, don't imagine anything but your object of observation. But before you do get onto that object, imagine that everyone you've brought there to get onto an object with you as well. And you can multiply your virtue in terms of how many beings you're trying to do it in relation to. And it's really important, if, as Gonchu Dembe Drome says, our goal is to try to put virtuous imprints every moment that we possibly can, then we should try to really take each of those moments and look at them, how we could do that in the most impactful way possible, how we could get the most bang for our buck, how we could make it like a time machine in the sense of, no, we can't change time, but we could speed up how much time it takes us to get to Buddhahood if we can somehow pack the most powerful stuff into each moment possible. And it's not just trying to put a virtuous imprint in those moments, it's trying to put a virtuous imprint that gives rise to a Buddhahood, saying each of those virtuous imprints I'm doing for the sake of Buddhahood, and those contaminated virtues that we're engaging in on the regular paths, we can purify through the seeing emptiness directly and make those virtues uncontaminated. And eventually those virtues will give rise to enjoyment bodies and wisdom dharmakayas and et cetera, et cetera. So all these beings are here. And now imagine we bring the merit field. Imagine Buddha Shakyamuni is in the space in front of us on a nice throne, supported by snow lions, and His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Chen Rezig in person, Kalachakra in person, is here with us, imagining Kensur Geshe Wandak Rinpoche, Geshe Lobsang Gompo Rinpoche, Demalocha Rinpoche, Kensur Lobsang Gyatso Rinpoche, imagining all these holy beings, any being you consider an enlightened being, imagine them here in the space in front of you, imagining Geshe Dorje Damdula and Rinpoche and Umzala Geshe Aga Rinpoche, imagining Professor Jeffrey Hopkins, Gen Nenden Jambil Drapala, in the space in front of us, right here, looking into our eyes with so much love and compassion. They only came into this world to be able to help us, to be able to learn what the truth of suchness is, in order for us to learn how to get rid of our own afflictive obstructions and obstructions to omniscience. They're looking into our eyes with immense loving kindness. And when you've been around beings, these kinds of holy beings, you know what I mean. Like Gen Palden Drapa Rinpoche and Geshe Yeshe Tapke Rinpoche, beings, these holy beings, Lache Rinpoche, these holy beings that come in our world and they flash in front of our eyes with just such a presence and such love and compassion and wisdom. These are the beings that you're inviting here, and you're imagining they're right there in front of you. This isn't a picture you're imagining. You're imagining these beings are here. And when you call the merit field, they come. You just don't have the karma to see it. When Lama Tsongkhapa called the merit field, he actually saw them single file, the 35 Buddhas coming right to his space in front of him. We will also have these experiences by depending upon this practice that we're doing right now. We're so fortunate. Imagine the beings of the extensive deeds lineage passed down from Buddha Shakyamuni to Maitreya and Asanga and Basu Bandhu and Dignaga and Dharmakirti and Vimukta Sena and Haribhadra and Shakyaprabha and Gunaprabha, Lama Salingpa and Lord Atisha and Dron Tompa Rinpoche, imagining them all in the space in front of you. We're so connected to these beings. We're so connected to Lama Tsongkhapa's great treatise on the stage of the path to enlightenment that Namgyal Khensa Geshe Wandak Rinpoche taught us week after week after week for over a decade, and taught all of those accompanying smaller Lam Rims and the three principal aspects of the path and all of the Lojong texts for over 20 years. We're so connected to this extensive deeds lineage. And now imagine the beings of the profound view lineage passed down from Buddha Shakyamuni to Manjushri and Nagarjuna and Buddha Palita and Arya Deva and Chandrakirti and Shanti Deva and Baba Vega and Chandrashita, Kamala Shila and Jana Garba, all of these holy beings. And again, imagining Lama Salimpa and imagining Lord Atisha and Dron Tompa. We're so fortunate that Lord Atisha combined all of these lineages to show us all about the grounds and paths and the ethical behavior, as well as the profound view of the Madhyamaka Prasangika passed down through the profound view lineage, and showing us all of the ways to get bodhicitta, and combining these practices to show us how to understand the three turnings of the wheel of Dharma and how to practice the first and the third turning of the wheel of Dharma in dependence upon the nature of reality presented in the second turning of the wheel of Dharma. We're so fortunate. Imagine the beings passing down the lineage of blessings from Lord Vajradhara to Saraha, Matripa, and Tilopa, and Naropa, and Lotsawa Marpa, and Jetsu Milarepa, and Jay Gampo, right here in the space in front of us. They're right here. This isn't a fairy tale. These are beings who wrote texts, who have really impacted our lives. If we've ever looked at the Lam Rim, we've been blessed by these beings. Imagining that Dron Tompa, that holy lay Lama, is passing down the lineage of the Lam Rim to the three old Kadampa lineages. Now imagining the holy beings of the Tibetan tradition are in the space in front of you, the Nyingma tradition, Padmasambhava and Longchenpa and Mipam, all of these holy beings right there. Imagining the beings of the Sakya lineage, Sakya Pandita, Sakya Konga Nimpo, Sakya Randawa. Imagining the beings of the Kaju lineage, imagining all of the Karmapas, imagining Jay Gampopa right here in the space in front of us, imagining the beings of the Galupa lineage, imagining Lama Tsongkhapa and Kirtubje and Gyaltsabje right there. Basu Chuji Jetson, Panchen Son Andrapa, Jayan Sheba, Janja Ropi Dorje, Gontra Jimmy Wampo, Jetsumpa, Purbajo, all of these holy beings, the seventh Dalai Lama, the third Dalai Lama, the fifth Dalai Lama, all of these holy beings, first Dalai Lama, all of these holy beings are in the space in front of us. Because of the kindness of our teachers, we're connected to them. Because of the kindness of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, because of the kindness of Namgyo Khyentse Geshe Wandak Rinpoche. We're so connected to these beings. Don't ever forget this is our spiritual family. Now imagine the beings of the highest Yoga Tantra, Performance Tantra, and Action Tantra. Imagining all the 35 Buddhas and the protector deities. Just imagining these just powerful beings in the space in front of you. Looking into your eyes with immense loving and kindness, making supplications to them to be able to understand whatever it is you need to understand to become more satisfied and more satisfied and more satisfied. To remove the self-cherishing attitude more, to remove self-grasping ignorance more, to be able to engage in the liberating paths and the ripening paths that are needed to be combined together to go through Teata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasangate Bodhisoha, the path of accumulation, preparation, seeing, meditation, and no more learning. This is all the beings have come to show us what to do. That's all they've come to show us. That's it. In the meantime, they make friends with us and so forth, but they've only come here to do one thing, and that's teach us how to realize emptiness as bodhisattvas, and then eventually get rid of all of the various levels of this grade of the, great, small of the grade, and the medium of the grade, all of the levels of the afflictions that we have to get rid of in terms of afflictive obstructions. And then on the 8th, 9th, and 10th bodhisattva levels, all of the obstructions to omniscience that we get rid of. We have to get rid of the afflictive obstructions first, and then the obstructions to omniscience. They've only come to this world. These holy beings have only come here to show us this. They have no other interest than that. They pretend that they seem like they may. There's only one thing that they care about, and it was interesting. Namgyo Khyentse Geshe Wandak Rinpoche and I spent almost 25 years together, and he barely knew anything about me personally. Barely. 10 facts about Jeff, other than like what needs to be done to fix his mind. Ready, go. And I don't know that he could have said 10. Like, I don't even know if he'd have 5 on his fingertips, but he was the most important person to me on the face of the planet, and showed me what love was, showed me what compassion was. And I've never known anybody that I was closer to that I can clearly say didn't know 5 or 10 facts about me in terms of what I did, where I went to school, what kind of degree I even had. Did I have a degree, not have it? What I didn't do or did do. I was in a band, what kind of this or that. I mean, none of it was important, because he only came here to show me how to get rid of afflictive obstructions and obstructions to omniscience. And boy, did he give some like real convincing material. And so when he passed, or before he passed, he asked me to continue convincing myself first and foremost, and convincing anybody who wanted to hear me try to convince. So I feel so fortunate to be here with you tonight. So now we're imagining all of these beings are here, sentient beings and all the enlightened beings. And with that being said, we'll recite the Heart Sutra, the second turning of the Wheel of Dharma, the perfection of wisdom, where we find out exactly what it is that's propelling us again and again and again into a set of contaminated aggregates beyond our control. At the kind of surface level, we see we have these contaminated karmas and afflictions and their corresponding seeds that are giving rise to these being forced again and again and again into aggregates. Forced, and lack of freedom is misery. We're being forced again and again and again. Why are we being forced? Because we misapprehend reality. because we think things inherently exist when they don't inherently exist. We think that ourselves, we think that persons, ourselves and other persons, so persons and all phenomena inherently exist. We feel that we can find ourselves right within the object ourself. We feel that we can find a chair right within the object to inherently exist as chair. But when we start to investigate the way that we normally perceive the world, when we start to use philosophy, when we go beyond the ordinary world's way of analyzing things and just a kind of ordinary conventional ways and ordinary conventions that we agree upon, when we start to investigate the way that things appear to us, we start to engage in what's called ultimate analysis. And when we start to engage in an ultimate analysis, because there's something fishy, the Buddha says, about the way that we're apprehending ourself and all phenomena, when we start to engage in an investigation to see if the Buddha's right or not, is there something fishy going on here? Is there some kind of trick that I'm playing on myself? Is there something happening here? The Buddha's saying there's an origin of suffering that's a misapprehension of reality that's going on. So let me see if the Buddha's right or not. Because if the Buddha's right, or if I'm right, we can prove it by moving closer to an object. Like Nagarjuna says, if the mirage is as water as it appears, why, when we move closer to the mirage, don't we find the water? Because there's no water there. So if the self of person or self of phenomena inherently exists as it appears to exist right in the object objectively from its own side, with self-defining characteristics that can be established, that make me feel like everything has different values in this room right now, because they exist from their own side and they make me feel a certain way. If those things should make me feel a certain way because they seem to be so solid over there and they seem to be valuable or invaluable, then I should be able to find that thing that I care so much about or care so little about or am so angry at when it's something I dislike. So when my mind is going after stuff and not getting it, it doesn't feel good. And I see when my mind gets in front of stuff it doesn't like, and I try to push it away, it doesn't feel good. I have to figure out whether or not the stuff that's making me do that is as valuable as I think that it is. So this is what the Heart Sutra is coming to tell us. No, the stuff that you think is so valuable doesn't have the value that you're placing on it. The stuff exists, it just doesn't have a mode of subsistence, a mode of existence that you think that it does. You think that it exists inherently. You think it exists intrinsically. You think that it exists right within the object. And that makes you think funny. And when you think like that, you grasp at it as having a true self. You grasp at it as being findable, separate from a designating consciousness. You don't even think that that chair is over there coming into being because of the subject. So of course that thing over there is an antique and that thing over there isn't an antique. So that's worth more value. So there's an antique chair that I feel exists from its own side that I'm not giving any value. I feel it's just right there, just sitting there, so solid and concrete. So if it is, it must, if it's inherently exists, if it's able to stand up on its own without me positing it, imputing it, if it exists right within the basis of designation, right there inherently, then I should be able to, or something else, I should be able to find it. So when we engage in what's called ultimate analysis that goes beyond conventions, goes beyond what the ordinary world thinks. The ordinary world isn't engaged in philosophy, trying to figure out whether an object inherently exists. We say that we find whether things exist or not, and we say they conventionally exist based on the ordinary world. We have real and unreal conventions, based on what the ordinary world conceives as real and unreal, when it's validly cognized with a an object find for valid conventional analysis is conventional truths, the stuff around us. Doesn't really do much analyzing whatsoever. Just kind of like says there's a thing there and that thing's called this. You think that thing's, yeah, this thing's called that. That tallies with the reality of a conventional designating consciousness is that can be, that is that thing over there. And, you know, we're going to sit in it, the chair. But when we subject it to a little bit finer analysis and we see, well, is that thing existing the way that I think it's existing? Because I think that chair is an antique chair and I've got to protect it because it's valuable. It makes me feel like, ooh, that makes me feel good. It makes me feel something about it that I don't feel for something else. You know, I have to see what's the nature then of this thing that I feel so different about than I do about something else. So if there's some findable ooey gooiness there that I really should value or not value, let's look. So is it in the parts? That's one option. Or not in the parts. That's the other option. I think everybody would agree that when we're looking at a chair, if you're saying there's an intrinsically existent chair there, close your eyes, chair, chair, chair lands in your generic image, chair, you should be able to say there's something intrinsically findably from the side of the object that I can say is chair. And when you start to seek it out within its parts, you say there's a seat and some legs. Is the leg the chair? Is the seat the chair? Is the back the chair? Okay, I start to narrow it down. Or the atoms the chair? You know, I start to do all the business. Like, are the atoms the chair? Now I'm starting to like already get all screwed up because now I'm talking about atoms. I was talking about a chair a minute ago. Wait a second. What happened? Why am I talking about atoms? Well, there's a bunch of atoms over there. The chair is a possessor of, in my mind. Looks like two different entities in my mind. So I'm looking for chair. Where's the chair? Is a chair an atom? Is a chair a leg? Is a chair a part? Is a chair a back? You know, is the chair a possessor? That's fine. Can I find something? I start to look for it in the parts and I say, okay, I don't find it there. Let me see if I can find a chair outside of the parts. Try to sit down on a chair outside of its parts. I promise you're going to fall on the floor. So that doesn't make any sense. So chair doesn't make any sense when you subject it to ultimate analysis. Ultimate analysis isn't looking for a chair. It's looking for an intrinsically existent chair, because that's what we set out to do. We said there's this thing over there I give value to. So it's got to have a status that's valuable or not valuable, that's findable. And when we start to look where that is, where's that chair, we don't come up with it under ultimate analysis because we lose the chair because we're only been looking for an inherently existent chair. An inherent existence doesn't exist. An inherently existent chair doesn't exist. So it's a non-finding of an inherently existent chair that is realized for ultimate analysis. But it has no business about knowing about chairs per se, only intrinsically existent chairs, and it decides they don't exist. But then when you come out of ultimate analysis and you see there's a thing over there that you can sit in, you have to say, okay, I didn't find it in its parts. I didn't find it outside of its parts, but it's sitting over there and I could sit in it. There has to be something subjectively going on. And the Buddha says that, hey, if you really are honest, and this is something that will take decades for you to understand. If you're really honest, when you subject things to ultimate analysis, then you come out of ultimate analysis and you have to say that they're still existent. You know that they are because you sit in them. You'll come to the conclusion that things are like your person. Self a person is merely designated in dependence upon a collection of among the 4 or 5 aggregates that serves as a basis of designation. And there's nothing within that basis of designation that intrinsically exists from its own side as the person. In that case, we were talking about a person, a Jeff. A Jeff is just a mere imputation on a basis of designation, independence upon a basis of designation, not on That's actually a Vaisheshika view. There's a entity on and an entity without attributes. It's very strange. But we have to try to get to the point where we understand that there's nothing from the object side. There's not any bit of intrinsicality, even conventionally, that would say that it has self-defining characteristics of chairness. It's merely imputed by this designating consciousness, mine, my object possessor. It's merely imputed in dependence upon this collection that serves as a basis of designation. But there's no chair that's independent of that imputed, that thought designation, that thought imputation, which is independence upon the basis of designation. The designated object is not the basis of designation. So this is what the Buddha came to tell us. So who cares, right? Just sounds like a bunch of words. Well, from this idea that things exist from their own side, I get what's called inappropriate attention. And I say, oh, that thing makes me feel good. Oh, that thing makes me feel bad. I feel good. I need that attachment. That makes me feel bad. I will punch that if I need to. Aversion. And it all came from a lie that said that I had any business giving it value in the first place because of the fact that I'm misperceiving it from Jump Street. I'm saying that it's something that it's not, that has a value it can't possibly have. Because someone will walk in here and say that chair's a piece of junk. There's no way someone could walk in here and say that. In my world, my world. And that's what we have to come to understand. That there's this subject that's been playing a game and experiencing something in a wrong way, through a wrong lens, through a lens of inherent existence. Even the appearance of everything to my sense consciousness is that things inherently exist, according to Madhyamaka Prasangika. My eye consciousness is perceiving inherent existence, and my eye consciousness sees the object of negation. That's a really tough place to start from if your eye consciousness is bringing in the information as with carrying forward something that doesn't exist. Because beginningless time, you've been attached to this. And you have this imprints that have existed since beginningless time that creates this appearance. So in order to undo something that even appears to us, we have to first say, is that appearing in a way that tallies with reality? And we have to start apprehending it a little differently, clean up our minds to the point where we can then have it appear completely differently, no matter whether because the Buddha is the only being who can have conventional and ultimate reality simultaneously appear and cognize them. Until you're a Buddha, you got one or the other. You can either be seeing emptiness, or you can have the appearance of true existence, the appearance of inherent existence happening. When you're seeing emptiness, you have the absence. You have a non-affirming negative you're realizing. But when you come out of seeing emptiness and you're dealing with conventional reality, it appears to inherently exist until you're a Buddha. So we've got kind of cards stacked against us, but wisdom demolishes ignorance. So this Heart Sutra is the wisdom that shows us, it kind of is the presentation of, hey, this is what the kind of truth is. And then you have to apply a gajillion reasons to prove to yourself that this stuff matters enough to take seriously, because it'll allow you to never suffer again. It'll allow you to be able to help everyone never suffer again. It'll allow you to achieve a state the moment you're a Buddha that fulfills every single sentient being's need, because all sentient beings need are Buddhas to show them how to be able to get rid of afflictive obstructions and obstructions to omniscience. Okay. We'll read the prayers and we'll do dedication. I did too long of an introduction this evening, but I think it was all really important material. So we'll read the Heart Sutra just for auspicious reasons and for reasons of removing obstacles. and then we'll do a dedication prayer. And I want to thank everybody for your patient listening this evening. It's only because there's listeners that I can talk. And by talking, it helps me to clarify my own mind around these details and be able to get to a place where I can discover the next thing I need to discover in order to be satisfied myself and in order to stop worrying. So we'll read the Heart Sutra. We didn't get to the foundation of all good qualities, but the whole point of this class, again, is just to try to give you some tips to be able to apply to your own meditation practice and to your own understanding of these things, so that I, in an hour and a half, can't tell you much, but I can give you some keys to go look for some, open some doors to go look for some information that can help you and help your mind. So let's read the Heart Sutra together as a blessing, and think that you're now with all sentient beings in the Vulture Peak Mountain, with Chenrezig and Shariputra and Buddha blessing their minds and giving this incredible teaching on the lack of inherent existence of all phenomena, on the ultimate truth, but also simultaneously hidden within it the teaching on the five paths, the five Mahayana paths of accumulation, path of accumulation, preparation, seeing, meditation, and no more learning. So we're so fortunate that we have this information in our world, and I encourage you to dive deep into it. The Sutra of the Heart of Transcendent Knowledge. Thus have I heard, once the Blessed One was dwelling in Rajagriha at Vulture Peak Mountain, together with a great gathering of the Sangha of monks and a great gathering of the Sangha of Bodhisattvas. At that time, the Blessed One entered the Samadhi that expresses the Dharma, called profound illumination. At the same time, noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, while practicing the profound Prajnaparamita, saw in this way. He saw the five skandhas to be empty of nature. Then, through the power of the Buddha, Venerable Shariputra said to noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, how should a son or daughter of noble family train who wishes to practice a profound Prajnaparamita? Addressed in this way, noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, said to Venerable Shariputra, O Shariputra, a son or daughter of noble family who wishes to practice the profound Prajnaparamita should see in this way, seeing the five skandhas to be empty of nature. Form is emptiness, emptiness also is form, emptiness is no other than form, form is no other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, perception, formation, and consciousness are emptiness. Thus, Shariputra, all dharmas are emptiness. There are no characteristics. There is no birth and no cessation. There is no impurity and no purity. There is no decrease and no increase. Therefore, Shariputra, in emptiness, there is no form, no feeling, no perception, no formation, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no appearance, no sound, no smell, no taste, no touch, no dharmas, no I, dhatu, up to no mind, dhatu, no dhatu of dharmas, no mind, consciousness, dhatu, no ignorance, no end of ignorance, up to old age and death, no end of old age and death, no suffering, no origin of suffering, no cessation of suffering, no path, no wisdom, and no non-attainment, and no attainment and no non-attainment. Therefore, Shariputra, since the bodhisattvas have no attainment, they abide by means of prajnaparamitas. Since there is no obscuration of mind, there is no fear. They transcend falsity and attain complete nirvana. All the Buddhas of the three times by means of Prajnaparamita fully awaken to unsurpassable, true, complete enlightenment. Therefore, the great mantra of Prajnaparamita, the mantra of great insight, the unsurpassed mantra, the unequal mantra, the mantra that calms all suffering, should be known as truth, since there is no deception. The Prajnaparamita mantra is said in this way: Te ata om gate gate paragate parasangate bodhisoha. Thus, Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train in the profound Prajnaparamita. Then the Blessed One arose from that samadhi and praised noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, saying, Good, good, O son of noble family, thus it is, O son of noble family, thus it is. One should practice the profound Prajnaparamita just as you have taught, and all the Tathagatas will rejoice. When the Blessed One had said this, Venerable Shariputra and noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, that whole assembly in the world with its gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, rejoiced and praised the words of the Blessed One. Kala jibe nijo damba ne ngushe du ju nga yi du do jen ju baba lama yi bu jen zi nison kandro so la sha tse lo aga samara ja shandara samara be aga samara ja san. Aga samara ja shandara samara ya be de adon ga de ga de baragati barasangati badi zo a baba gonja sanji ga ye de me do ji je lo do ji me ba do ji je wa do ji dagi ba ji me do bi ji nan ji je den gar ye zo a Kirin jan ja je ju shi wa dan me dun ne be jan da de wa dan dun ba dun ji bon zon dun jo ji da shi de jan den da de le jo. And now, yeah, I think we'll end with the concluding mandala offerings and so forth. And I just want to say again, thank you for listening. And I hope that it was of value to you, and that some of the oral tradition that I hopefully can help to pass down affects your minds in a positive way that allows you to kind of traverse this path and proliferate your Buddha, mature your Buddha nature, make it more and more mature to the point of complete maturity where you're a Buddha, who will still have a mind that's empty of inherent existence. And there will not be a findable final thing that does not have inherent existence, because if it did, and we had a findable final thing that doesn't have inherent existence within us, then we would inherently exist. And we wouldn't be able to say that our mind doesn't inherently exist, because it has a findable thing that inherently exists that's part of our mind. And our mind is part of us. And if we're saying that there's a part of our mind that inherently exists, then we're finding something that is not prasangika, that isn't a final view, that reifies ourselves and tells us that our mind is something that's concrete. And don't worry, because you still have this. And you have to jump out of the plane without the parachute and just feel safe to pull the ripcord just at the right time, with the view that is the middle, that's free from extremes, that allows you to posit conventional things while saying they are not inherently existent, allows you to show how a Buddha can operate while not being inherently existent. And as soon as you have something that inherently exists, you have something that's stuck, you have something that cannot move, you have something that then there's just no way for it to abide. It can't, it's proven that it can't arise from itself. It can't inherently arise from other. It can't inherently arise from both, and it can't inherently be causeless. So we really have to investigate this stuff. And we're so fortunate that we have the information to do so. So that's enough out of me. Concluding mandal offering and dedication prayer. The fundamental ground is scented with incense and strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the four continents, the sun, and the moon. I imagine this is a Buddha land and offer it. May all sentient beings enjoy this pure realm. I dedicate whatever virtues I have collected for the benefit of the teachings and of all sentient beings, and in particular for the essential teachings of Venerable Losang Drapa to shine forever. I send forth this jeweled mandala to you, precious Guru. Any mistakes that I've made, may they be purified by the mantra of Vajrasattva. Om Benza Sato Samayam and Benza Sato Zena Vajradila Meva Sutta Meva Subhameva Honoraju Meva Vasavasini Meva Rachasava Kamasuju Me Kijam Sriam Kuru Maha Bhagavanza Vatataka Benzamuka Benzabava Mahasamaya Safa Ahom Fe. May we always be protected by Palden Lamo Jo Rama Jojo Rama Tunjagala Rachamo Rama Vacha Dacha Tunjo Ruda Ruda Hongjo Hom. And anybody who's new, who's just hearing this, I know it's a lot of information, and I'm trying to present the Lam Rim tradition as a practice, as kind of an information of trickle down information from the oral tradition, where there's, pockets of these practices that are understandable. And to look at this kind of as a whole is really important. So I encourage you all to look into the Lam Rim text, to look at the teachings by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, authentic texts that are beginner books that'll outline what the practices for beings of three capacities are, that then you can have kind of the framework around the things that I'm talking about. And I think that it'll help you greatly. I dedicate all this virtue to emulate the knowledge of the hero Manjushri, and likewise Samantabhadra as well. With whatever dedication is praised as supreme by all the conquerors who traverse the three times, I also dedicate all my roots of virtue for the sake of auspicious deeds. Long life prayer for His Holiness the Dalai Lama. In that pure land surrounded by snowy mountains, you are the source of all benefit and happiness. All powerful Avalokiteshvara, Tenzin Gyatso, may you stay until samsara's end. And then last but not least, a prayer of supplication to Namgyal Khenser Geshe Wandak Rinpoche that I wrote. I started writing it in the late 90s as a prayer of long life prayer. And then it became really long, and we wrote a short long life prayer. Actually, Roy Lee helped us to make a short long life prayer that we used for Khenser Rinpoche. And then a year after his passing, when we did the ceremony, I finished it and made it a supplication. So this is a supplication to my root Lama, Namgyal Khenser Geshe Wandak Rinpoche, to please come back. And then let's all also remember Geshe Lobsang Gompo Rinpoche and Demolocha Rinpoche, all these holy beings who've passed that you've been connected with, and Professor Jeffrey Hopkins Genenda and Jambal Drapala, that please come back. But this is written specifically to Namgyal Khenser Geshe Wandak Rinpoche. A complex yogi poses as a simple monk. Homage to Kensur Geshe Wandak Rinpoche, our precious spiritual friend who is inseparable from Aryatara. I fully prostrate, covering as many atoms of the earth as possible, to your pure body, speech, mind, and enlightened activities. I offer to you drinking water, bathing water, flowers, incense, candles, scented water, food, and music purified by Om, 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 Om. The rarity of having 1 million wish-fulfilling gems is a common occurrence compared to meeting with a holy teacher like you, who placed the complete path to Buddhahood in our childlike hands. Just like Atisha, who came to Tibet with a lamp to dispel the darkness of ignorance, you, kind abbot, arrived in the West with a lineage purer than a diamond and begged us never to be satisfied with partial instructions. The teachings of the extensive deeds and profound view lineages flowed from our lips, your lips like nectar for our ears, that elucidated the teachings for beings of three capacities. Now that sound has stopped. All composite things are impermanent. You told us that all of your teachers passed away and understood this sadness, entreating us to continue our studies. The Buddha does not wash away the negativities of beings, nor does he remove their miseries by his hands. His spiritual realizations are not transferred to them. It is by teaching the truth of suchness that beings are liberated. We are not prepared to take this difficult journey to the highest goodness of Buddhahood without your continued guidance. The sadness in our hearts would be too overwhelming. May you swiftly return to this world and take care of us in all of our lives, wherever we may be, never leaving our hearts and crowns. May all sentient beings perfectly realize renunciation, bodhicitta, and the correct view of emptiness, so they know who you really are. And the last thing I want to say is we're so fortunate. I was just reading this part, and it says, you told us that all of your teachers passed away and understood the sadness. And I remember the moment that Rinpoche said it to me. And I didn't have a clue that he was telling me he was going to pass away in the coming months. I thought he was telling me stories, and he would always talk about these beings like Kensur Pema Jetsen and Ling Rinpoche and Trijung Rinpoche and Zong Rinpoche and Gen Uze and Gen Lachatla, all these holy beings that he would talk about. And he said, Ninji, I lost all of my teachers due, and I know how this feels. I know how sad this can be. And he so many times told us the story of Joan Sapa and talking to his students and saying, them asking, when I pass, what do you do? What do I do? The students asking him and him saying that the books are your teacher now. And we're so fortunate that before Rinpoche passed, he said, you can get other teachers to be your teacher. And we went and did that. We have these incredible teachers. And I want to say that don't forget that part of your family are beings like Kensur Pema Jetsen Rinpoche and Ling Rinpoche and Trijung Rinpoche and Zong Rinpoche, these beings that were right there with our teachers, and Gen Shakra and Gen Nima, right there with our teachers. And they're like our spiritual grandparents. They're like giants when we read about them, but they're our spiritual grandparents. And we haven't received any different information in the palm of our hands, as Pabunka Rinpoche says. We haven't received any different path in the palm of our hands than they did to receive what they've realized. Amazing. Thank you all. I look forward to seeing you next time. Take care. Oh, I got to do this first. Ending meeting. I hope you all have a great week. We'll talk soon.